Thank you for surviving another day. Your ancestors are proud of you. This is Sweet Dreams Africa, a sacred place for rest, healing, and dreaming through the power of African stories. Before we begin, please tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? And what time of night are you heading to bed? If my stories bring you comfort, you can support the journey by buying me a cup of hibiscus tea. The link is in the description to this video. Hey, don't forget to subscribe. You can do so by tapping the bell icon on your screen, so a new story can find you every night before you fall asleep. Now close your eyes, African child. Tonight's story begins. The morning sun painted the Nairobi skyline in shades of gold and amber as Mama Wanjiku made her way to the Uhuru Gardens. She carried a basket of fresh sukuma wiki and tomatoes from her small plots. The vegetables still dewy from the night's gentle rain. The city was awakening slowly, as it always did, with the distant sound of matatus rumbling along Kenyatta Avenue and the sweet calls of weaver birds building their nests in the fever trees. Mama Wanjiku had been selling vegetables in the same spot for 15 years, ever since she moved to the city from her village in Nyeri. She knew every regular customer, every shopkeeper, every street child who might need a kind word or a free tomato. But this morning felt different, somehow, though she couldn't quite say why. As she arranged her vegetables on the colorful kanga cloth, a strange brightness caught her eye. There, in the small patch of grass beside the memorial, something glimmered like a falling star. Mama Wanjiku approached carefully, her bare feet soft on the damp earth. What she found there would change not just her life, but the life of all of Nairobi. It was a baby boy, no more than a few weeks old, wrapped in cloth that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. His skin was the deep brown of rich earth after rain, and his eyes held the wisdom of ancient baobab trees. He was perfectly healthy, perfectly beautiful, and perfectly alone. Mama Wanjiku's heart, which had longed for a child for so many years, opened like a flower to the morning sun. She gathered the infant in her arms, and as she did, she felt a warmth that seemed to come from the very stars themselves. The baby looked up at her with those knowing eyes and smiled. And in that moment, Mama Wanjiku knew that this child was meant to be hers. Kijani, she whispered. the name coming to her like a gentle breeze. Little green one, for you came to me in this place of growing things. She took the baby to her small apartment in Eastley, where the walls were painted bright blue and yellow marigolds grew in old paint cans on the windowsill. Her neighbor, Mama Fatima, came to see the child and clucked her tongue in approval. He is beautiful, this one, Mama Fatima said, her hijab framing her kind face. But where did he come from, sister? The ancestors sent him. Mama Wanjiku replied simply, and somehow that felt like the truth. The months that followed were filled with the gentle rhythms of raising a child in the heart of Nairobi. Kijani grew strong and healthy, drinking milk from Mama Wanjiku's neighbor who kept a cow on the outskirts of the city. He laughed at the bright kanga cloths fluttering on the line, reached for the yellow weaver birds that nested outside his window, and slept peacefully to the sounds of the city settling into evening. But as Kijani grew, Mama Wanjiku began to notice things that made her wonder. When he was 6 months old, she found him floating gently above his crib, gurgling happily at the ceiling. When he was 8 months old, she discovered him lifting his wooden toys with just a look, stacking them in impossible towers that swayed but never fell. Pole, pole, she would whisper to him, the Swahili words for slowly, slowly, becoming a gentle lullaby. All things in their time, Manangu. The other mothers in the neighborhood grew to love Kijani as if he were their own. When Mama Aisha's baby cried with fever, Kijani would reach out his small hand and the fever would break. When little Kamal fell and scraped his knee, Kijani would pat the wound with his tiny fingers and the pain would fade like morning mist. That child has a gift, the elders would say, nodding their grey heads as they watched Kijani play in the dusty courtyard. He carries the blessing of the ancestors. As Kijani grew into a toddler, his abilities became more apparent, but never frightening. He could run faster than the wind that blew down from the Ongang hills, but he always stopped to walk beside his mama. He could lift things that should have been too heavy for his small hands, but he used his strength only to help, carrying water containers for the elderly women, moving fallen branches from the path, lifting younger children who had fallen. When Kijani was 3 years old, a great drought came to the land. The rains failed, and the river that ran through the city became a thin trickle. The price of water rose, and many families struggled. Mama Wanjiku watched her neighbors' faces grow tight with worry. She watched the children's eyes grow large with thirst. One evening, as the sun set behind the jacaranda trees, Kijani tugged at his mother's skirts. "Mama," he said in his sweet, clear voice, "the water is sleeping deep in the earth. Should I wake it up?" Mama Wanjiku knelt down to look into her son's eyes. At 3 years old, he spoke like a child, but his eyes held depth she was only beginning to understand. "What do you mean?" Kijani pointed to the dried riverbed. "The water is there, Mama. It's just hiding. I can call it." That night, after the last call to prayer had faded from the nearby mosque, and the city had settled into its quiet evening. That night, after the last call to prayer had faded from the nearby mosque, and the city had settled into its evening quiet, Kijani walked to the riverbed. Mama Wanjiku followed, along with Mama Fatima and several other neighbors who had come to trust in the strange blessing that surrounded this child. Kijani knelt by the dry earth, placed his hands on the ground, closed his eyes, and whispered something in a language that sounded like wind through acacia trees, like rain on red earth, like the first words spoken at the dawn of creation. The water came slowly at first, seeping up through the sand like tears of joy. Then it bubbled forth, clear and sweet, filling the riverbed with life-giving water. The women began to sing, their voices joining in a traditional song of thanksgiving that their grandmothers had taught them, and their grandmothers before them. From that day forward, the neighborhood around Uhuru Gardens never lacked for water. But Kijani's gift was known only to those who lived there, and they guarded. From that day forward, the neighborhood around Uhuru Gardens never lacked water. But Kijani's gift was known only to those who lived there, and they guarded the secret like a precious treasure. They understood that some blessings were meant to be shared quietly, like the warmth of a fire passed from one home to another. As Kijani grew older, he attended the local primary school where he learned to write and read in both English and Swahili. His teacher, Mr. Mwangi, was a patient man who had taught children for 30 years. He noticed that Kijani seemed to understand lessons before they were taught, that he could solve problems that should have been difficult for his age. This boy has a bright mind, Mr. Mangi told Mama Wanjiku one afternoon as they sat under the shade of a mango tree. He learns like a river flowing naturally, without effort. But Mr. Mangi also noticed something else. When other children struggled with their lessons, Kijani would quietly help them understand. When someone was sad, Kijani would sit beside them and share his lunch. When the bullies from the older class picked on the smaller children, Kijani would step between them, and somehow, without any violence, the bullies would lose interest and walk away. He has more than a bright mind, Mr. Mangi said to his wife that evening. He has a bright heart. The seasons turned, and Kijani grew from a child into a young man. His abilities grew stronger, but so did his understanding of when and how to use them. He learned to move through the world like a gentle wind, helping where he could, healing what was broken, but always with the wisdom to know that some things must be left to unfold in their own time. When Kijani was 16, a great storm came to Nairobi. The rains that had been absent for so long returned with fury, and the river that he had once called forth now threatened to flood the low-lying areas where the poorest families lived. The city's drainage systems, old and insufficient, could not handle the deluge. Kijani stood at his window, watching the water rise in the streets below. He could feel the fear of his neighbors, could sense the danger approaching the small homes where his childhood friends lived with their families. Mama Wanjiku, now graying at the temples but still strong, came to stand beside him. The water gave life, she said softly, but now it brings danger. What will you do, Manango? Kijani looked at his mother. This woman who had found him as a baby and loved him as her own, who had never questioned his gifts, but had taught him to use them with wisdom and compassion. I will do what I can, Mama, but I will do it as you taught me, with love, not force. That night, as the storm raged over the city, Kijani walked through the flooded streets. He moved like a spirit of the water itself, guiding the flood away from the homes, channeling it towards the empty lots and the storm drains that could handle the flow. That night, as the storm raged over the city, Kijani walked through the flooded streets. He moved like a spirit of the water itself, guiding the flood away from the homes, channeling it towards the empty lots and the storm drains that could handle the flow. He worked through the night, unseen by most, helping where he could, without drawing attention to himself. When morning came, the neighborhood had been spared the worst of the flooding. People emerged from their homes to find that the water had somehow flowed around their houses, leaving only small puddles that reflected the clearing sky. They gathered in the courtyards to give thanks, and their voices rose in songs of gratitude that had been sung in this land for generations. Kijani stood at his window, tired but peaceful, watching his neighbors celebrate. Mama Wanjiku brought him a cup of chai, spiced with cardamom and ginger, and they sat together in comfortable silence. "You could do much more," she said finally. "You could stop all suffering, heal all sickness, solve all problems." Kijani sipped his tea and watched the family of her dada hibiscus picking for worms in the wet earth. "Yes, Mama, but would that be helping? Or would it be taking away the chances for people to grow strong, to learn, to become who they are meant to be?" His mother smiled, understanding in her eyes. "You have learned the most important lesson, Wanango. Power without wisdom is like a river without banks. It destroys what it means to nourish." As the years passed, Kijani became a teacher himself, working at the same school where Mr. Manangi had taught him. He married Amina, a nurse whose gentle hands could ease suffering and whose laughter could brighten the darkest day. Together, they raised children who carried on the traditions of kindness and service that had shaped their father's life. Kijani's abilities remained strong, but he used them quietly, like a gardener tending growing things. He helped crops grow during droughts, guided lost children home, and brought peace to places where conflict threatened to take roots. He worked with the elders to preserve old stories, with the young to plant new trees, and with everyone to build a community where all could thrive. The neighborhood around Uhuru Gardens became known as a place of particular blessing. Children grew up healthy and strong. Families prospered through honest work. And visitors always commented on the feeling of peace that seemed to flow like water through the streets. Those who lived there knew that they were part of something special, though they might not have been able to name exactly what it was. On quiet evenings, Kijani would sit on his small balcony and listen to the symphony of his city. Nairobi stretched out before him, a tapestry of different peoples and traditions, all woven together by the simple human need for shelter, food, love, and hope. The skyscrapers of the business district gleamed in the distance, while nearby smoke rose from cooking fires where families gathered to share their evening meals. Sometimes, when the moon was full and the jacaranda trees were in bloom, Kijani would think about the larger world beyond his neighborhood. He would sense the places where help was needed, where his abilities could ease suffering or prevent disaster. The temptation to act on a grander scale was always there, to reveal himself and use his powers to reshape the world according to his vision of justice and peace. But then, he would remember Mama Wanjiku's words about power and wisdom, and he would remember the lesson of the water that could give both life. But then he would remember Mama Wanjiku's words about power and wisdom, and he would remember the lesson of the water that could both give life and bring destruction. He would remember that true change came not from great acts of power, but from small acts of love, repeated every day by ordinary people who chose to care for one another. And so Kijani continued his work, teaching children to read and write, helping neighbors when they needed it, and nurturing the garden of community that had grown around him. He understood that he was like the deep roots of the baobab tree, hidden but essential, drawing strength from the earth and sharing it with all who sheltered in his branches. Mama Wanjiku lived to see her grandson's children, and on the day she died, she did so peacefully, surrounded by the love of the community she had helped to create. As her spirit prepared to join the ancestors, she whispered to Kijani one last time, "You have been everything I hoped you would be, Wanangu. Not because of what you can do, but because of who you chose to become." The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Mama Wanjiku's kindness and by the gentle blessing that surrounded her adopted son. They sang the old songs and shared stories that would be told for generations. Stories of a woman who had found a special child and raised him to be a man of wisdom and compassion. Years later, as Kijani himself grew older, he would tell his own children and grandchildren the story of how their grandmother had found him in the Uhuru Gardens, how she had named him Kijani and taught him that true strength came from love, not power. He would tell them about the importance of community, about the responsibility that came with gifts, and about the wisdom of knowing when to act and when to simply be present. The children would listen with wide eyes. Years later, as Kijani himself grew older, he would tell his own children and grandchildren the story of how their grandmother had found him in the Uhuru Gardens, how she had named him Kijani and taught him that true strength came from love, not power. He would tell them about the importance of community, about the responsibility that came with gifts, and about the wisdom of knowing when to act and when to simply be present. The children would listen with wide eyes, wondering if their grandfather really had come from the stars, really could command the elements, really could heal with a touch. And Kijani would smile and tell them that the most important gifts were the ones everyone could share: kindness, compassion, the willingness to help a neighbor in need. As the sun sets over Nairobi each evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Kijani would feel the contentment that comes from a life lived in service to others. He had been given extraordinary abilities, but he had learned to use them in ordinary ways, woven into the fabric of daily life, like threads in a beautiful cloth. The city continued to grow and change around him, but the neighborhood around Uhuru Gardens remained a place of peace. New families moved in and learned the unspoken traditions of mutual support and shared responsibility. Children grew up hearing the stories of the man who had been found as a baby in the gardens, who had grown up to be a teacher and a quiet guardian of their community. Sometimes, on still nights, when the acacia trees stood like silent sentinels against the star-filled sky, Kijani would walk through the streets of his neighborhood. He would check on the elderly, making sure the children were safe, and simply be present as a reminder that someone cared. His footsteps were soft on the packed earth, his presence as gentle as the night breeze that carried the scents of jasmine and wood smoke. And in those quiet moments, walking through the streets where he had grown up, surrounded by the homes of people who had become his family, Kijani would feel the deep satisfaction of knowing that he had found his purpose. He had been given the power to change the world, but he had chosen instead to love it exactly as it was, one neighbor at a time, one kindness at a time, one day at a time. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over his arrival in the gardens all those years ago. They seemed to shine with approval, as if the universe itself was pleased with the choice he had made. And as the city settled into sleep around him, Kijani would return to his home, to his family, to the simple joy of being exactly where he belonged. In the morning, the sun would rise again over Nairobi, and Kijani would wake to another day of teaching, helping, and loving. The extraordinary child who had fallen from the stars had grown into a man who understood that the most powerful force in the universe was not the ability to move mountains, but the choice to move hearts. And in the neighborhood around the Uhuru Gardens, where the water always flowed and the children always laughed and the community always cared for its own, that force continued to work its quiet magic, one gentle day at a time. As night fell over the city and the last calls of the evening prayers faded into peaceful silence, Kijani would close his eyes and give thanks for the gift of an ordinary life lived extraordinarily well. And the stars would continue their ancient dance overhead, watching over the city, and the man who had learned that true heroism was not about being seen, but about seeing others, not about being powerful, but about empowering love to grow in the spaces between one heart and another. The story of Kijani, the star child of Nairobi, would be told for generations, not as a tale of superhuman feats. The story of Kijani, the star child of Nairobi, would be told for generations, not as a tale of superhuman feats, but as a reminder, that the greatest strength comes from the choice to serve others, and that the most profound changes happen not with great noise and spectacle, but with the quiet persistence of love flowing like water through the channels of everyday life, nourishing all it touches and asking for nothing in return.